She whispered, "What if someone sees?" I smiled and said, "Then let them envy what we have." I still remember the first time I noticed her, not just as my neighbor, but as someone who stirred something deeper in me. It was a quiet afternoon, one of those golden hours when the sun spills over the rooftops, soft and heavy, turning the world a shade warmer than it really is. I was heading up the narrow path that led to our apartment block when I saw her struggling with grocery bags that looked far too heavy for her arms. She was only a few steps ahead of me, pausing on the stairs to catch her breath. Her hair, dark with just a few strands of silver glinting in the sunlight, slipped loose from behind her ear as she tried to adjust her grip on the bags. That was the first detail I noticed, the way she moved with such grace, even when she was weighed down, and how her presence seemed to command attention without trying. "Here, let me help you," I said, my voice breaking the silence between us. She turned, surprised, her eyes, calm yet watchful, meeting mine. For a second, it felt like she was deciding whether to refuse. But then she smiled, soft but genuine, and handed me one of the heavier bags. "Thank you. I thought I could manage, but I may have overestimated myself today." Her tone carried that mixture of confidence and humility that instantly drew me in. She wasn't someone used to asking for help, I could tell. Which made the moment, this small exchange, feel more personal than it should have. As we climbed the stairs together, I became acutely aware of the little things, the faint floral scent that clung to her clothes, the quiet strength in her posture, the way her fingers brushed mine briefly when she shifted the weight of the bag. None of it was intentional, yet it stayed with me. Her apartment was only a door away from mine, though until then we had exchanged nothing more than polite nods in the hallway. Stepping inside her world for the first time, even for just a moment, felt strangely intimate. The room was filled with soft light, books stacked neatly on the coffee table, a vase of fresh flowers on the counter. It suited her, elegant, lived in, with a kind of quiet beauty. She set her keys down and turned back to me. "I really appreciate this. Most people just pass by." I shrugged, trying not to make too much of it, though inside I felt a spark of something I couldn't quite name. "Well, then I guess I'm not most people." She laughed lightly, a sound that carried more warmth than I expected. For a brief moment, her eyes lingered on me, curious, thoughtful. Then she nodded, almost as if tucking the moment away before it could last too long. As I placed the grocery bags on her counter and stepped back, I noticed my own heartbeat had quickened. Nothing had really happened, not in the way stories usually begin. Yet I walked back to my apartment with the faint, undeniable sense that something had quietly shifted. That was the day I stopped seeing her only as my neighbor. From then on, every time I passed her door, I wondered if she remembered it too, the way our paths had unexpectedly drawn just a little closer. It started with small talk. The kind of neighborly chatter that usually drifts away and is forgotten by the next morning. But with her, those moments lingered. Most evenings, after the heat of the day had faded, I'd step outside with a cup of tea in hand. Our porches faced each other across a narrow walkway, the distance close enough to hear each other's voices without raising them. I didn't expect her to be out there as often as she was. But there she'd be, sometimes watering her plants, sometimes just sitting quietly with a book, her hair catching the soft glow of the porch light. At first, it was just nods and greetings. "Good evening." "Long day?" Simple phrases, nothing more. But each time, our words stretched a little further, like a thread slowly weaving itself tighter. One night, she asked me about the book I was reading. Another, I asked her about the music drifting faintly from her open window. And before I knew it, we were talking for hours about the small details of life, how she found peace in gardening, how I liked to write late into the night, how the world felt a little too fast, too noisy sometimes. I began to notice how she listened. Not the way most people listen, half distracted, ready to reply. She listened with her whole presence, her eyes steady, her body angled slightly toward me. And when she laughed, it wasn't loud or careless. It was soft, low, and filled with something that made my chest tighten every time I heard it. The nights had a rhythm of their own. The sound of crickets playing somewhere beyond the fences. The faint hum of traffic in the distance. Sometimes the air smelled of jasmine drifting from her garden. Sometimes it was just the quiet comfort of shared silence, where words weren't needed. One evening stands out more than the rest. I remember her leaning against the railing of her porch, the sleeve of her cardigan slipping just enough to reveal the delicate line of her wrist. As she shifted to make a point, her shoulder brushed against mine for the briefest second. The touch was so subtle, it might have meant nothing. Yet it was enough to send a warmth through me, a small reminder of how close we really were. "Do you ever feel," she asked suddenly, her voice softer than before, "that time passes too quickly?" I thought about it before answering. The glow of the porch light haloed her profile, and for a moment, it was hard to focus on anything else. "Sometimes," I said. "But not on nights like this." Her eyes met mine across the space between us. Not for long, just enough for me to feel the weight of the silence that followed. Then she looked away, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, almost as if she didn't want me to notice how much the question had revealed about her. From then on, our evening talks became something I looked forward to more than I wanted to admit. They weren't just conversations, they were a kind of quiet refuge, a space where the world felt smaller, slower, and infinitely more alive simply because she was in it. There's something about late evenings that loosens the heart. The world grows quiet, shadows deepen, and words we usually keep tucked away begin to surface. That's how it was the night she let me see a side of her I hadn't expected. We were sitting outside again, the two of us leaning against the railings of our porches. The air was cooler that night, touched by the faint chill of early autumn. She had a light shawl draped around her shoulders, the fabric slipping gently as she shifted, exposing the curve of her collarbone before she pulled it back into place. I noticed small details like that more often than I should have, tiny gestures that felt unremarkable to her but stayed with me long after. Our conversation wandered easily, as it always did. We talked about books, about the quiet charm of old movies, about little routines that made life feel steadier. She teased me once, saying my tea habit made me seem like an old soul. I laughed, but secretly I liked the way she said it. Then, her voice lowered, almost hesitant. "You know, sometimes I think people look at me and wonder why I'm still here, living alone. Like I've missed some step everyone else took." The words caught me off guard. She rarely spoke of herself in that way, rarely revealed anything beyond her usual confidence. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, the faint light casting delicate shadows across her face. She looked strong, yes, but also quietly tired. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I just watched her fingers trace along the railing, slowly, as if she needed something to anchor her. Finally, I stepped closer. Not too much, not in a way that would make her retreat, just enough to close the unnecessary distance between us. Without thinking, I placed my hand gently over hers. The contact was light, careful, but undeniable. Her hand stiffened slightly at first, as though surprised, and then, it stilled. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers relaxed beneath mine, as if the weight of another's touch was something she hadn't realized she needed. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," I said quietly. "And you definitely don't need to prove anything. Some people, they judge because it's easier than understanding." Her eyes lifted then, slowly meeting mine. There was something in them I hadn't seen before, a flicker of raw honesty, tinged with gratitude, but also fear. It was as if she wanted to believe me but wasn't sure she had the right to. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the unspoken things she carried, and the steady promise I was trying to give without saying too much. My thumb brushed lightly against her knuckles, and I felt the faintest squeeze in return, so subtle I might have imagined it. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer, almost fragile. "You make it sound so simple." I smiled gently. "Maybe it is. Or maybe it's just simple when I'm talking to you." For the first time, she didn't laugh at my words, didn't deflect with lightness. She simply looked at me, and in that quiet gaze, I realized something had shifted between us. She wasn't just my neighbor anymore. She was someone I wanted to protect, to understand, to hold, not with possession, but with presence. That night, when we finally said goodnight, the warmth of her hand lingered in mine long after we let go. The night it happened was different from the others. Maybe it was the way the air seemed heavier, carrying the faint smell of rain on its way. Or maybe it was the silence inside her living room, so much softer, more private than the porch where our talks usually bloomed. She had invited me in after a long conversation outside, her voice casual, though I noticed the way her fingers lingered on the doorframe before opening it wider for me. I stepped inside, and for the first time, I felt how different it was to share space with her in this way. No open air, no excuses of chance encounters. Just us. We sat on her couch, a soft, earth-tone thing that seemed to fit her perfectly, comfortable, warm, lived in. She had made tea for us, though neither of us touched it much. The mugs sat on the table, steam curling upward and fading into the dim lamplight. Our conversation meandered like it always did, from books to family, to stories from her work. But that night, there were longer pauses between sentences, silences that seemed to hum with something unspoken. I found myself noticing details I hadn't before. The way her hair fell over her shoulder in loose waves, the delicate slope of her neck, the faint line of worry that appeared between her brows when she grew thoughtful. At one point, my hand brushed against hers on the couch. It was nothing deliberate, just a passing movement. But it made her still instantly. I felt her tense, not in rejection, but in sudden awareness. My pulse quickened, and I turned slightly toward her, watching her carefully. Her eyes flicked toward the window, then back to me. And in a whisper barely above the sound of the rain starting outside, she said, "What if someone sees?" Her voice carried layers, hesitation, fear, a quiet plea. It wasn't the world inside the room that troubled her, but the world beyond it. The neighbors, the unspoken rules, the eyes that always seemed to watch and judge. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched her, how she clasped her hands together as though to anchor herself, how she wouldn't quite meet my gaze. And I realized she wasn't asking just about being seen, she was asking if this fragile thread between us was safe to follow. I leaned back slightly, giving her space but not distance. "Does it matter?" I asked softly. She looked at me then, her eyes wide, vulnerable, and yet quietly defiant. "It matters more than you think," she whispered. The moment stretched, heavy but delicate. I could almost feel the walls she kept so carefully built around herself, walls she was afraid would collapse if she let me step any closer. And yet, despite the fear in her words, she hadn't moved away. Her hand still rested near mine, close enough that the warmth of her skin brushed against me every time she shifted slightly. I wanted to reach for her, to take away the hesitation. But something told me the silence was part of the answer, that giving her the space to wrestle with her own fear was more intimate than trying to break it. So we sat there, the rain whispering against the window, the tea growing cold, the air filled with the quiet ache of what was almost, but not yet. And in that unspoken tension, I felt both the distance between us and the pull drawing us closer than ever. The silence stretched between us like a thread pulled taut. Her words still lingered. "What if someone sees?" And I could feel the weight of them pressing down on the space we shared. The rain outside had grown heavier, a steady rhythm against the glass, as if the night itself was listening, waiting for what would come next. She sat with her shoulders drawn in, her shawl slipping slightly, her hands clasped together tightly in her lap. The confidence she usually carried so effortlessly seemed to have faded, leaving only the bare truth of her worry. For a moment, she looked less like the graceful, composed woman I'd come to admire, and more like someone standing at the edge of a decision that scared her. I shifted slightly closer, careful not to startle her. My voice, when it came, was low, steady. "Then let them envy." The words left me before I could think twice. But as soon as I said them, I knew they were the only answer that mattered. Her head turned toward me slowly, her eyes wide, the lamplight catching the faint shimmer of unshed emotion in them. For a heartbeat, either of us moved. The air was thick, heavy, every sound amplified, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the rain sliding down the window, the faint hum of electricity in the room. I let the silence hold, not rushing her, not pushing. My hand shifted gently until it rested over hers. Her fingers tensed beneath mine at first, but then, gradually, I felt them soften. A breath escaped her lips, not quite a sigh, not quite a laugh, something in between, the kind of sound that comes when a guard begins to fall. "Do you really mean that?" she asked finally, her voice trembling just enough for me to notice. I nodded. "I do. Let them think what they want. They don't know what's here, what we have when it's just us." Her gaze dropped to our hands, my thumb brushing slowly along the side of her palm. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the delicate thrum of her pulse beneath the surface. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand slightly, her fingers slipping between mine in a gesture so small yet so profound, it sent a quiet rush of heat through my chest. For the first time that night, she let herself lean back, her shoulders relaxing as though she had been carrying a weight too long. Her eyes met mine again, softer now, filled with something that wasn't quite certainty, but wasn't fear either. "Maybe you're right," she murmured. "Maybe I've been worrying about the wrong things." I smiled, not triumphant, but tender. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's just easier to be brave when we're together." The corners of her lips curved, a quiet smile forming there, fragile but real. And in that moment, the room seemed smaller, warmer, as though the world outside had faded completely. Her hand stayed in mine, her thumb brushing back against my skin, a silent answer, a quiet surrender. And though nothing more was said, I knew something had shifted. The hesitation wasn't gone, not entirely. But it was no longer in control. That night, I realized that reassurance doesn't always come in grand declarations. Sometimes it's just a whisper, a touch, and the steady promise of being there when the other person needs it most. The rain outside slowed to a soft drizzle, the kind that left the world hushed and glistening. Inside her living room, the air had shifted. It no longer felt heavy with hesitation but calm, like something fragile had finally settled into place. She hadn't let go of my hand since. Her fingers remained loosely tangled with mine, her touch no longer uncertain but deliberate, as if she had decided, if only for this night, to stop holding herself back. I didn't speak. I didn't want to break the quiet. There are moments where words feel too clumsy, too loud, and this was one of them. She exhaled slowly, as though releasing a breath she'd been holding for years. Then, almost without warning, she shifted closer. Her shoulder brushed against mine, then lingered. Her warmth pressed gently into me, until finally, she let her head rest on my shoulder. The world seemed to still. Her cheek was soft against my shirt, her hair brushing lightly against my jaw with the faintest movement. I could feel the rhythm of her breathing, slow and steady, syncing with mine in a way that made the room feel like it existed only for us. My arm moved naturally, wrapping around her in a loose embrace, not pulling, not holding too tight, just enough to let her know she was safe there. For a while, we simply sat like that. The rain tapping at the window, the muted glow of the lamp painting her living room in gold, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. It was ordinary, and yet I knew I would remember it for the rest of my life. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost drowsy. "Do you ever wonder if this is foolish?" I smiled faintly, looking down at her, though she didn't lift her head. "All the time," I admitted. "But then I think about moments like this, and I can't find a single reason to regret it." She didn't answer right away, but I felt her smile against my shoulder. That was enough. I realized then that love doesn't always arrive with fireworks or declarations. Sometimes it comes gently, slipping into your life in the shape of evenings spent side by side, in the warmth of a hand you don't want to let go of, in the quiet courage of leaning against someone when the world outside feels too loud. Her hand tightened faintly in mine, a silent reassurance that she felt it too. And as we sat there, two people bound not by the approval of others but by something far more private, I understood that the question of, "What if someone sees?" no longer mattered. If they saw, they would see two people who had found something rare. Something simple, but undeniable. And if they envied it, well, perhaps they should. That night, As the rain gave way to silence, I realized I didn't need tomorrow's answers, or the world's permission. All I needed was the weight of her head against my shoulder, the warmth of her hand in mine, and the quiet certainty that, for once, neither of us felt alone. 16.